Okay, so you're probably looking at these images and wondering what they have to do with the Victorian era. And you obviously know that this is about the Victorian era because you saw the title of the video. So what does this weird / odd looking furnace, lots of money signs and a dead man on the floor have to do with the Victorian era? Well, these are all common occurrences that happened during the Victorian era. Basically, if you heard from the previous slide, phones were invented and were becoming popular. However, they were very expensive, which meant that most people were unable to afford them. And one more thing is that during the Victorian era, there was a lot of beheading. And by a lot, there was a lot. So obviously, this then leads to the topic of the video, which is the Victorian Modes of Transport. But back here. So, what are the Victorian Modes of Transport? Basically, if you don't already know, we didn't start out life with cars, buses, trains, railways, and things like that. However, these were all things that were discovered and then soon it started to become more popular during the Victorian era. The first that was invented during this time was something that looks around something like this. Now, forgive me, my drawing is not up to par, but basically this is what you would call back then a carriage, or just simpler, a cart, which would normally be carried by a horse. But do you really expect me to draw a horse with these? Yeah, no, I'm not doing that. So, well, carriages were the first mode of Victorian transport that most people used, and as a matter of fact, they were only used by people who were able to afford them, this being the middle class and the upper class. The working class were unable to use them due to maintaining a carriage and and renting a horse being very expensive. So sadly, not many people were able to use these, which then leads us to the next big establishment that was made. And if we go to the next slide, as you can see, in order here, we have the carriage being first, as you can see here. However, as you can see here, this is what looks like, I think you may have known, these were actually the first big bicycles before we got ours today. Yeah, that's right. This was what was the hip bicycles that were used back then. It's crazy to think about, but there you go. Yeah, right now. You like it? Good. Or bad, because this is what you got. Now, unfortunately though, once again, while bicycles were much easier to access, they weren't exactly the best way because, like I just said, most people didn't know how to ride them. So, you're probably wondering, okay, as you know by probably the order of this list, you're probably wondering, what is this? Because this is just another carriage, isn't it? Well, that's actually where you're wrong, because this is no ordinary carriage, or in fact, it's not a carriage at all. This was actually one of the most earliest cars that was invented. Yes, this was the first cars. Anyway, this is what you had back then, a steam car. And yes, it ran on steam. There was no petrol cars when in the 1800s. Yet. Keyword yet. Because they would come later. And with the steam car came the steam engines. And with the steam engines came steam buses. So the first one, this being a carriage, was the very first one. It was obvious. Like, come on. If you look at this compared to the steam car, you could definitely see why this would come first. The first bike was technically it was first established in 1871 by James Starley. For each of these, I'm going to do a rough drawing of it. It's probably not going to look that good, but I mean, like, what do you do? Yeah, that looks good. This is James Starley. Okay, so the next big hit was, so that was the bicycle. Now, for the steam car, this was actually created by someone who named their son Richard Trevithick. What kind of name is that? Anyway, the steam car, because I showed you that earlier. It looks like a boat, but it's definitely a car. Hey, look, it's got wheels. Wheels? Yeah, there you go. So, the first steam car, or first sighting of it, was actually much before the first bicycle. So it's not exactly in chronological order, but I like to consider them the stages of evolution. You have the carriage, you have the bicycle, you have the steam car, the steam bus, the train, or specifically the railways, and then you have the cabs, which is cut off, actually. My bad. So, what came after Richard Trevithick? Such a stupid name. What came after Richard Trevithick and the first steam car? Well, the problem with the steam car back then in the Victorian era was the car back then was only 20 miles per hour, which is good, I guess. It was okay. Most Victorians need a faster alternative because, come on, only being able to move 20 miles per hour, especially nowadays, would be very, very frustrating. Okay, so we need a faster alternative. So we eventually got railways, which were invented by George Hudson, and funny enough, he earned the nickname the Railway King. So, actually, that's what I thought until I started typing this out for the script and found out that no, he didn't invent them, rather it was actually first cited by Richard Trevithick in 1804. Remember Richard Trevithick? Oh, I didn't give him a drawing yet, hold on, let me give him a super awesome drawing. So, while George Hudson did earn the name the Railway King, the nickname Railway King, he did not invent them, rather he just contributed to them becoming more popular, more reasonable, and much more accessible.